Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Today we're going to update Bailador again as we continue working him in the canter and building his strength and stamina to be able to sustain the canter. As we've talked about in the past, we ran into this problem with this horse. Every time we do much canter work, he'd immediately get a sore back and would set us back immensely. So we've gone to working him in the shambone. He still lunges and warms up in the shambone every day to get him nice and soft over his back. He's still not quite ready. I think this horse, if we just got on him, is such a delicate back that, we just, by warming it up before we get on, once again, even at this stage, we still do that. Now, he's completely relaxed, and you could certainly get on and ride him. But I think the issue is he needs the warm up through the back, and before we get up there. So that's what we still do with him. And I think you can see, even as he comes around here in silhouette in the walk, how much beefier he's getting, so to speak, across his loin there. If you see as he comes around there, there's still a little bit of a dip in that back, but very little whatsoever. And once again, how nicely he's relaxing. And I think that's the big thing we've learned with this horse. If he's not relaxed, at least at this point, not to say that he couldn't get a little excited at something. He certainly does once in a while, but it's not like where it used to be, where it was just a panic with him and he just fought everything that you did. Once again, because he was so uncomfortable in his own skin, I think. So once again, he's feeling very comfortable with himself now. Beautiful stretch down, as you can see, as he walks around. He's not reacting to anything around the ring. There's a lot of business going on there. But look how nice and meaty he's getting across his flanks now and his hindquarters, where he used to be quite weedy through his hindquarters, and he didn't have much, depth, that is, so to speak, through his chest and barrel. But now we can see that's beginning to add muscle all along the top line. So here, as always, even though our goal today is going to be to work on the canter, everything else that we do to warm the horse up remains the same. So this horse started off in the walk and the stretch, and then we're going to start a little bit of lateral work here. Now you can see how still rubbery his neck is a little bit there. We always have to be very careful of that to keep getting it down. So what her goal was there was to get what we have now in the last few steps, to get him to stretch down and stay in the shoulder in, rather than as you saw in the beginning of that. And once again, that's due to his old break in his neck. Once again, all these horses that have been overflexed in that third and fourth vertebrae of the neck are very difficult for many years. And once again, when I tell people, when you go out to look for horses to buy, that's the number one thing I look for, is whether the horse has already been broken in the neck, as we say. What it really is just the vertebrae have been spread apart, so we have this artificial giving in the neck. So that's why this has become popular, because if you ride a horse hollow, it will never come on the bit correctly. It will never flex correctly at the pole. So what ended up happening as people began to force horses against their hands and with draw reins and harsh bits and these kind of things, you can just force a horse to the point that it actually separates those vertebrae, especially if you do it when they're very young and very malleable. So once again, this horse has overcome that to a great degree, but we still see once in a while he'll just kind of twist his head to one side, kind of funny, and from a funny place there, once again, back at that third or fourth vertebrae. But that was a really lovely leg yield there. Once again, how nice and smooth he did that, without any swishing and this sort of thing. So he felt comfortable in it. And of course, we're always coming back to keep the stretch going, to keep him as long and deep as we can at all times. So we keep that back swinging over. So once again, that's what, when we talk about what frame the horse is in, what we're looking for is the frame that simply allows the horse to work in the most natural and efficient method. And that is, once again, always when the horse is able to lift its back, then it can balance between the front and back end. If it can't, then you can get away with that with shorter gaited horses and some of very dull minds. But when you take a horse like Bailador here, who is a huge horse, and shorten his gaits, you get with what he ended up with, was just a totally frustrated horse who just had no idea what he was in the world to do other than to be taken out and and asked to. Imagine, for a horse, when you draw rein in this sort of, it's like, taking Chinese girls and bounding their feet when you do it to a horse of this size, so they lose the sense of even how to move, how nature intended them to move. But once again, you see how beautiful he comes around here, how nicely he's stretching out there, and you see even he still will swish his tail a little bit. The left side was extremely difficult when we started this horse. If you even put your leg on him on the left side, he would literally just go out of his mind. So it took a long time to get him over that, and once again, it was a matter of building his strength. Remember, when we talk about bending horses, the thing we have to worry about first is that longitudinal bend. You can never bend a horse laterally until it lifts its back, as simple as that. So don't even think about it. It just comes very gradually. So once again, here's a nice shoulder in. He didn't twist the neck to one side. The rhythm stayed pretty nicely, and she's able to keep him up pretty much in a working walk without him shortening the stride. And remember, that's what we're always looking for. So once we find the full expression of the horse's gaits, where he's stretched all the way down into the contact and swinging over his back, then simply every day what we do is simply bring the pole up, but without shortening the neck back into the body. Once again, that's how you see these horses flipping their front legs out. Once again, that's horses I'm talking about. When horses are very hollow, held against the hand, they cram the actual neck against the top of the shoulders, which makes the leg kind of flip out, which, once again, if the judges were scoring that correctly, those should be scored as 0 movements because they're not actually performing the movement. Once again, if the hind leg doesn't come through in the extension to the same length as the front leg, it's not correct and the horse is not working over its back, and it's quite easy to see once you begin to recognize these things. But how lovely the walk is here, swinging and active. There's the good walk that we want. That's about his working walk in the stretch, where it's about optimal. See the big step, how he's reaching over the step of the front foot. And once again, staying very relaxed. And once again, you can see with this horse now, we have moved him back into a snaffle. We had to ride him for about 2 years in a double bridle, which is perfectly acceptable to do. The double bridle used to be considered the master's bridle, and it's what we used on difficult horses, to make their mouths if you do it correctly. That is, by never having constant tension on the curb rein. But look how beautifully he goes right into the trot stretch, stays consistent in it. And as you saw in our last video when we talked about him getting in the zone, this horse is finally getting in the zone where you can just get on him and have a nice ride. But once again, that's dependent on doing the same things. You'll see how every day here, how we build on the patterns that we do. We don't do everything in the same way, but we do the movements in the same order, or that is, we bring the horse up through its level of frame in the same order every day. So look how nicely he's able to keep that back end coming through there. He slipped a little bit, just as I said that, but nice and swinging over his back. Nice connection to the bridle. And you see how she sometimes widens her hand there. Once again, that's to be able to keep contact as the horse stretches down. And how we're able to come from a long swinging stretch. But once again, look how the horse is beginning. Even though his neck is stretched down, look how he's beginning to lift the forehand off the ground. You can see this is what we call thrust. This is what real dressage is. You can see that ball, and as the muscles develop and the withers pull up through the shoulders, the hindquarters are able to lower, and that creates even more of a picture of a ball and that feeling of, once again, the endless wave. You can see how even right now, how lovely and forward. So start watching people ride and just ask yourself, is that what forward looks like? Does that look like there's nothing impeding the forward motion? So collection is not, and that's what we see in so many so-called collected horses today. They're not collected, they've just had their gaits shortened. And once again, if they're a good enough moving horse, with a lot of natural suspension, that's where we get the phony leg movers that have become so popular in this kind of phony dressage today. You'll hear people argue about, oh, is it classical versus show ring? Well, there is no difference. Dressage is only one thing, and if you're not doing it, if you're not developing the horse's top line throughout the work correctly in relaxation, you're not doing dressage. If the horse's back legs aren't coming through and it throws its front legs out, you're not doing dressage. If you're riding your horse's hollow, you're not doing dressage. So once again, this is what it should look like. It should look like it's flowing and rhythmic and like you're going someplace. That's what it means to go forward on a horse, for the horse to engage forward in rhythm underneath you. Think of it as that. And once again, that's what gives us this beautiful feeling of freedom when we're riding. Now look how nicely, once again, now we're experimenting with bringing him up to a working trot. So she was able to bring him right there with no change of stride. So the horse continues to feel like he can continue his, the level of freedom of expression of his own gaits. Remember, once again, that was the goal of the early masters of dressage, was to give the horse back, its natural elegance and self-carriage when you have a rider on it. And we can only do that through systematic gymnastic exercises. Now we go to the leg yield sound. Now remember, this is all just working up to the canter work that we're going to do. But the foundation, the way we structure our day with any horse is the hardest thing we're going to do is going to be the last thing that we do. The warm-up is always going to be the same, though not necessarily in the same order or the exact amount of time. It's going to be simply till we get the horse working over its back. No horse is going to come out of the walk until it's over its back in the walk. And if it can't get over its back in the walk, we never go to the trot until it will. So we don't do a lot of bad steps. Once again, this is why so many horses are going lame these days, because they're ridden with no shock absorbers. Just because you can canter a horse, once again, doesn't mean that you should. You should only canter it if you can canter it over its back, which is what we've worked so hard to get this horse to do. So here we go, is it the first canter today? Very nice. You notice he didn't throw his head or suck his neck back into the body. And you can see how the ball is continuing. You can even see that the canter is a little uphill, and now for the first time he's beginning to reach out with that shoulder because he's free to swing through his back. So first time we don't ask for a whole lot of that. That was really beautiful for him, and to make that transition and come right back to the stretch, that's exactly what we're looking for. Once again, look how we reestablish that swing. And also how even these, as you want to call them, low level but foundation exercise, how beautiful they are when you see a horse that do this correctly. It continues to flow like good music. Really nice here as we begin to just open his stride just a little bit on the long sides. So just the beginnings of asking him to do little bits of lengthenings. How nicely he's beginning to bend through the corners. And you can still see he even struggles to find that perfect spot. You see right there, he wants to be a little too high in the pole, but he continues to swing underneath, but she's able to soften him and get him right back to where he was. So see, he just had a little moment of difficulty there, but she was able to finesse it back through. So he never quite lost it, and that's what happened when he got up a little too high, so that's why we come right back to the stretch. So it begun to become difficult for him at that time. You see him actually struggling to maintain that position. Once you understand this basic principle of what we're trying to do here, it just, eliminates the need for a lot of trainers. Because if you can ride reasonably well and are not afraid of your horse, you can learn to do this, and you can develop your horses to the very highest level. But if you don't do this, very few horses are going to develop to a very high level. There's just many, many more horses that could be Olympic level, if you will, than there are people who know how to train them correctly. So, a beautiful horse like this, look at the potential as he begins to take shape. And you can see there in the canter, he struggles a little bit more. This is that left side again. It's always a little more difficulty. Right there, he settles into a nice working canter. And as soon as we get what we want, we reward him by coming back. We don't just keep trying to do it over and over and again. And that's one of the biggest things that people miss. What we're always looking for is that perfect moment. I don't ever train by the clock, so to speak. I have an idea of my mind to always take a horse. Every horse I want to train every day, I try to take one step further every day. And if I do that before long without stopping for vet bills and these kind of things, which is what stops the training of so many horses these days, is that, people end up, once they start to go to the draw reins and they get broken in the neck and all these kind of things, that's the beginning of all the troubles. If you develop horses correctly, always working them by working them over their back so they have the shock absorbers on. And once again, it's not just even, it's what this also does for the mind of the horse. You'll find very few horses that work this way will ever colic. I've been a professional horseman for 50 years at this point, and been riding for over 50 years, 55 or 6 years at this point. And we've only ever had 2 cases of colic in all of my years as a professional horseman. And one of those horses was a horse getting off a truck colicking that was sent to us, and another that died of a colic that when they did the opsite, it turns out it had tumors and cancer all through its intestines. So once again, it's very important. Why? Because look how the belly pulls up, just like on human beings. If you don't have abdominal muscles, you're going to have a lot of abdominal problems, because those muscles support your internal organs, which is, once again, that's what yoga is about, and some of these kind of things. And that's exactly what we're trying to do for the horse. Get him in that yoga place, the Zen mind, so to speak, where he's loving what he's doing. It feels good to him. As long as they're hurting, they're never going to like it. And just always remember what Bill Steinkraus said. If you can't get him to like it, it's never going to be very good. So how beautifully he's flowed from movement to movement here now. Hasn't flicked an ear at anything throughout this entire ride. Now there's a pretty nice working trot for him right there. Notice he's still swinging nicely over his back. And you see right there, like he pricked up his ear at something for just 1 second, and then just went right back to work. A year ago, that would have been a 5-foot jump to the side, even in a double bridle. So notice how we just keep coming back to the stretch. We ask for that optimal movement, like right there. We keep him up in the working trot as he floats across the arena. And once again, you notice how he's beginning to lift up all by himself. And that's really all collection is. The horse continues to develop to the point that its top line develops so well that the hindquarters can just reach underneath and they can begin to lower, which they want to do when horses have been correctly trained. And you don't have to beat them into doing it. When I see these dressage clanks and people just, beating and beating on horses or endlessly reining them back, thinking they're putting them on their hindquarters, there's nothing more untrue than that reining horses back puts them on the hindquarters. It shortens their gaits is all that it does and makes them somewhat submissive. You can force them into submission with it. Look how beautifully it comes back into that swinging stretch. And once again, notice how much sort of beefier this horse looks each time since the last couple of clinics. Once again, through his flanks there, he's starting to really, he always used to look like kind of a greyhound. So now he's starting to develop some real depth through his chest there. And you can see, so that's the optimal height for him to be, is about right there. And you can see how he struggles once in a while with that. But Amber does a wonderful job of just keeping him right there. And once again, the reason I have Amber riding this horse is I wanted to put less weight on him. And once again, so far it's been very, very successful, as you see. Because I just think this horse has a back that has to be babied for a little while. But it's certainly getting there now. Beautiful shoulder in right there, no loss of rhythm. Once again, just look at this horse's eyes now and his ears. You can see how he maintains. That's when he begins to get in the zone, like a runner. They get to that point where everything is flowing forward for them, and it feels good to them. Beautiful canter right there. Now that's the best so far. Now look how he keeps the neck out. So what he used to do, every time you canter this horse, he'd throw his neck back at you and crack his back downward. I mean, he was almost creating his own difficulty, which he was, but that's what happens when horses get in pain. They don't have a chiropractor they can say, hey, how do I stop doing this? Stop doing that. Like, our chiropractor says, drive with your legs straight on both sides and you won't have hip problems. And, but we can't tell that to the horse. We have to show it to the horse. But interestingly enough, when we do show them how they can work correctly, as you see with this one, they begin to relax and they begin to enjoy the work and become something that's really enjoyable to ride. Far too many people today look far too angry while they're riding horses, and that sort of becomes the moniker of the dressage rider these days, is this like super serious scowling person who's trying to get this animal to submit, and they're going to get it one way or another. Well, riding should always be kept light. It should always be fun. You should always ride with an attitude of fun and camaraderie with your horse, and it should be enjoyable for both of you at all times. As Faerber de Kerbrecht once said, the riding should end when it stops being a healthful exercise for both horse and rider. Beautifully swinging over his back, and once again, and now look at his mouth, how nicely foaming the lips are, and look how even those diagonal pairs are. So once again, even though you see the neck down, if you take your hand and you cover the neck of these stretching horses, you'll see how they're beginning to step up the ground. In other words, the front end, it's the back end, you have to understand, is what thrust. That's what we call thrust, like a jet engine. So when that hind leg steps underneath a round horse, it pushes that energy up into that round back. And that in itself, as the horse becomes stronger and stronger, just lifts the front end of the horse off the ground. So once again, as we say, collection is not a trick. It's a level of physical development. Once again, if you lay a horse off for a long time, it won't be able to collect as well. You'll have to build the muscles back to get it to the same level. So it's not something that's so. It's not like these idea, which is what a saddlebred is. Oh, we can just leave it in a stall for 2 weeks, pull it out, and hollow its back, and do this over and over again with chains on its legs. You see how he just resists there for just one moment. Comes right back into that soft contact again. And she works him into the canter, and you can see how he started to come up a little bit there, but she finessed him really well into it without him overreacting. And so now, today, we're just extending these canters. So we're just letting him canter on around the ring. We've just begun to do this so he can stay calm. Nice there. Look how nicely it bends through that corner. Same thing there. Nicely bent through the corner. He looks at the same little spot there again, but once again, you see how easy it was for her to bring him back. Beautifully done on the circle. Beautiful working canter. Very well done. And look how nicely he comes back with that trot. He was able to slow all the way down, and then, as I call it, dropping the landing gear. You can see how he just seamlessly switched gears without a lot of struggle and came right back into the stretch. That's what we're looking for. You always got to remember, that when you go to the gym, at least I hope you don't, though I see a lot of people doing this in the gym, but they never stretch, and they never let their muscles relax. So it's so important to muscle growth that the blood flows. This is why this horse had these big holes in his back when he came to us, because he's had a saddle on that had cut off the circulation in his back so badly that the muscles in his back had deteriorated literally down to the rib cage in a perfect form of a saddle. I really had never seen anything quite like it. So now we're doing a little sitting trot with him here. And you can see how he was just there for just a moment, but she's able to finesse him back into it again here for a moment. Right there, and he brings the head. But you see how that reaction was for him to want to sink away from that seated trot position. So we don't do too much of that yet, but little by little. So, and once again, of course, we come right back to the stretch after the sitting trot. And you can see how all that tension, just once again, you can see how he started to get a little tense there in that for a moment. Once again, how we come back and just wipe that tension away with the stretch again. That's also why the stretch is so important, when you are a beginning rider, or even an advanced rider. We all make mistakes sometimes. Look how beautifully long his neck is. Here you can see the entire length of the top line without any backwards break. Once again, look how he's floating over the ground. And once again, you can see the horse is starting to lift his back end, this front end is beginning to thrust up into the air because he can track his back feet right into the track of his front feet. So that tells you that the lift is starting to happen. Otherwise, he'd be forging. Certainly would be in a gait this long. Look how beautifully the neck is there, stretched all the way down. And we're going to work on the sitting trot again. Amber's having fun there. So what we try to do is go from that long stretch when we first start beginning to work in the sitting trot. We try to let the horses get all the way down there. So you can see he hollows there a little bit. We work on it a little bit. You can see his reaction there. He wants to stretch away. So you can see how he's still not strong enough to do a lot of this, but here he's beginning to give and relax about it. So we're at that point of, well, can we keep it there and there? Now he turns out really nice. So I would have started rising before that, but we were able to get there. Seemed like we were on the verge, and he was able to maintain it and come back to the stretch. So once again, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride with my associate trainer, Amber Matusik, and the wonderful horse Bailador. We want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas out there and a Happy New Year. We have lots of new things happening in the new year. We have the month-long trip in Europe in May, so lots of stuff happening next year. Want to wish Leslie and her family, Leslie is the owner of this beautiful animal, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. See you next time.